This is Bev Lutz, and this is our May Growth Rings for CCO, Center for Coaching and Organizations. We do these programs once every couple of months, and I'll give you a highlight that on July 18th at 11:30, we'll be having Pete Barrett sharing advances in research on feedback and implications for your role as coach. And many of you know Pete from our community. He's been at the forefront of a lot of thought leadership about feedback, and it's bound to be engaging because he's a humorous sort of person, as well as deeply rooted in evidence-based theory and research. So we welcome you to come to that. Growth Rings learning events are free and open to anyone who has an interest. Don't need to be a coach, can be a leader at any level in any domain, and we'll welcome you to come and join us in our learning environment. Natalia, welcome. So good to see you.
Thank you.
So another thing I want you to know is that Zoom does offer closed captioning if you should want to take advantage of that. I also want to let anybody who's watching who might not be familiar with our community to know that Center for Coaching and Organizations is a 501c3 nonprofit that really has a mission around expanding the reach and representation in coaching, be that as individual coaches, be that as leaders who coach, parents who coach, community members who coach. We want to bring coaching and coaching education further into the world for its transformative powers. Also want to let you know that we do have an ECHO, which sometimes is executive coaching in organizations, sometimes it's empowering coaching in organizations, and often it's everyone coaching in organizations. But ECHO is an ICF level 1 accredited coaching education program. We have our cohort 9 active right now. And if you're interested in cohort 10, reach out. There are info sessions, and we have grads and faculty and all sorts of folks who would be willing to talk to you at any point in time. And what I'd like to do now, though, is introduce our speaker for today. So Tara is just a force of nature. That's what I would say. This is one of the things I need to say about Tara is force of nature. The other thing I want to say is that this is a person with a depth of experience in technology, in the agile world, and definitely in the world of organizational behavior and development. And one of the things that intrigues me so much about Tara is the blend of technology and behavioral transformation, all in the service of this greater good around psychological safety, around creating healthy environments or repairing unhealthy environments so that people can really operate at their full potential. We often hear that becomes almost cliche. Oh, we're all going to do full potential. But imagine if everyone could feel safe coming to work, could feel like what they were going to say, no matter how seemingly outlandish, would be listened to with curiosity and the wonder of, oh, what's in here for me, or what's in here for us. So today, Tara's going to talk to us about the transformation, as I would put it, the transformational power of punk. And I'm just going to leave it there and turn it over to you, Tara.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Bev. It's so nice to see you all and to meet you all. Bev, is that okay if I share my screen for my slides? Okay.
Yeah, for sure. And let everyone know if you want them to pop in with questions, put things in the chat. I know you'll be checking it and I'll be watching over it, but just give us guidance on how you'd like us to be with you.
Yeah, I think just popping things in chat is just fine. I'm good with that. Okay, so I'm wondering if you can see my screen. Yes? Yes, okay, great. All right, so I'm gonna go into slideshow mode. Can still see it? We're good? Fantastic. All right. So thank you, Bev, for asking me to speak here today with the Growth Rings group. I know I'm actually someone who will eventually be going through the course with you. I was about to do so and my world turned upside down, and it turned out it was not the right time for me, but I'm so excited to continue the relationship that we have and continue to learn and grow together and learn from each other. So what I'm going to be talking about today is the power of subcultures and ecosystems, what the punk movement can teach us about healthier organizations. This is I've always been looking for ways to kind of meld the things that I love together and like kind of make it one big mushy pile of like, how do we embody all of these things at once, right? So a little bit about me. My name's Tara. I use she, her pronouns. So a few of the things that I do, I'm an organizational coach. I'm also a product and UX coach. If you are not involved in the tech space, it basically means I help organizations and clients build better things faster with humans in mind. So at the core of all of the work that I do, humans are at the center of it. And I don't care what kind of technology we're using, including AI, we can't lose that human piece. Otherwise, we're no longer threaded to the thing that actually keeps us going. I'm also a fearless organization practitioner. I'm not a big certification person in the tech world, but getting this certification was really important to me for a few reasons. Amy Edmondson is the person who really pioneered the term psychological safety, which is really at the core. I think that we all have our own preconceived notions of what it might be about. And I'm not going to be speaking a ton on psych safety today, although it kind of bleeds into it. And that's a lot of the work that I do. It's about having a team that is free to speak up, free to share their ideas, without fear of being punished, without fear of being judged, so that we can be as innovative as humanly possible. I started recognizing, working for the organizations I was working for, that executives really weren't paying attention to whether or not people were showing up in a genuine way. And really, executives need to be supportive, and it's not their job to fix that. I think it's both things in tandem, right? So getting this certification that was co-founded by Amy Edmondson was a way for me to bring quantitative data into the conversation to say, this is where your teams are. This is where you are as an executive team. And in these four domains, here's where you're lacking. Let's create a roadmap to talk about how we can change these things together. So it's a way to really like put the power into the hands of the people who are on the teams, as well as educate the folks who are at that higher leadership level, who aren't boots on the ground. They don't really know what's going on. So that's been really powerful for me. I'm also an instructor. So I teach all over the world with my clients, a lot of remote work as well. And I'm a writer. I'm actually working on my first novel right now, which is very exciting. So I'm very excited about that. I'm a former music writer. So punk is near and dear to me for lots of reasons, but I used to write for City Pages, which was a local newspaper / magazine in the Twin Cities, if you're familiar. I also wrote for some blogs that were based in Minneapolis. So I spent a lot of my 20s going to shows and meeting bands and hanging out. It was super awesome and I loved it. I've always been a person who's very tethered to music, and that has been something that has been consistent for me with almost everyone I work with in technology. There's this interesting tether to music. People are either former musicians. My mentor, David Hussman, was a musician. He worked at Paisley Park, all these other things. It's so funny how they kind of overlay together. Also have lots of interests outside of the work world. I'm a runner. I love indoor bouldering. I'm not quite the outdoor bouldering type. I haven't explored that yet. And dogs, because who doesn't love dogs? So I have a picture of my dogs here. So this is Birdie. She's a Wheaten Terrier. Penny, she's obviously a pug. And then our little Chihuahua named Cricket, whose tongue is out all the time because she doesn't have teeth. She does have her own Instagram page. She's incredible. But I love having animals. It's always been a big part of my life. They kind of help keep me grounded. So what I'm going to dig into today, I'm going to talk about why behavior matters. And again, if you have a question, please feel free to pop things into chat. I'm always happy to pause and dig into things. And there will be times where I invite that, but if it's just a random thought that pops into your head, by all means, this is a conversation, not just me blathering on. I'm going to talk about how reputations precede and impact companies. So when we coach at organizations, there's a lot of layers that come into that, right? And whether you're new to coaching or just thinking about coaching or you've been doing it for years, I think it's really important to consider the complexities and the impact of a reputation when it comes to a company and the why behind why it might have that reputation. And then I'm going to talk a bit about the power of punk subculture. What kind of led me down this road? Why do I want to bring these two things together? I'm going to talk about leading and lagging indicators of a healthy culture. The word culture is huge, and I'm going to dig into that as we continue on today. I'm also going to be talking about how responsibility leads to freedom. And if anyone's familiar with the responsibility process, that's something I'll be sharing today. And then a guide for movement makers. I really think it's important for us to continuously evolve and grow. And that's why you all do things like growth rings. And it's just an opportunity for us to play with what we know and what we don't know. And then Q&A. Before I move on, any initial questions, thoughts? All right. I will be moving on. So why this work matters to me. And by this work, I really mean human connection, organizational behavior practices. This is a picture of my dad and I. My dad worked for IBM for about 20 years as a salesman and then a sales trainer. And then he moved to smaller organizations and did sales, was very successful at it, decided to retire early. And the weight of the stress and the pressure and everything that he experienced just completely crushed him as soon as he retired. He had a psychotic break in 2005. And a lot of the ripple effect from that psychotic break, he started to acknowledge once he started digging into the work himself, was that he had gone through all of these pressure cooker moments of you don't sell, you don't eat. He would come home from work, and this was in the 80s when I was a kid. It wasn't okay to talk to your wife about your struggles. Obviously, he's not going to talk to his kids. He had a very competitive relationship with his boss and his coworkers. And it was that kind of old school bro mentality where it was just suck it up, do as good of a job as you can. And to this day, we still talk about this stuff all the time. He and I are very close. He's doing much better now, which is not super common for folks who have a psychotic break late in life. What it basically just means is that his brain broke. That's kind of how he puts it, is like, I just couldn't, all of those things that constantly stressed me out and were fears just crushed me. And so he kind of had to relearn how to do things, how to process problems. But I will say that the skills that he learned have made him a much gentler, much more open-minded human being. And so as I started doing coaching work in organizations, I had spent 10 years, by the way, in healthcare prior to that. I worked in mental health. I actually was this close to diving in and getting my license to be a therapist. And I kind of ended up melding my careers together, kind of like this topic today. And I discovered that, you know, I could see behind the scenes when people would be in meetings, this fear, this uncomfortability, especially when certain people were in the room. And I thought, why are we not talking about this? Why is this kind of this untouchable thing, especially if you're familiar with the tech space or you've ever worked in the tech world or anywhere where they ask you to collaborate? We throw a bunch of humans at a problem and we say, go solve it. But humans come in with all their own stuff. And if we don't set expectations with one another or agree to ways that we want to show up, it becomes a big old mess, right? And so I realized there was such a focus on the delivery of products and the delivery of things. There was no focus on interactions and behavior, or very, very little. And so I wanted to start looking at things like agility as our behavior should be agile just as much as our product should be. So how do we start to look at that, regardless of what industry we're in? We're humans first, and I really think we do ourselves a disservice when we put that second. I don't know if anyone here has coached at an organization or been a part of an organization where you feel like the focus was only on the work. A show of hands, if that ever happened. Just a couple people. Yeah, it's a very common thing. I think our traditional work culture invites that, right? Has anyone here seen Mad Men? I'm a huge fan. I'm also a huge fan of work, hopefully not being that way anymore. there were so many social constructs during that time in the early to late 60s through today. It exists in certain environments as well. But I thought this quote was really interesting in this data. The US work culture values productivity and dedication. And by the way, I just typed in Google United States work culture, and this is what came up for me. American professionals are known for their strong work ethic and commitment to their jobs. Their typical work week often exceeds the standard 40 hours, with some employees regularly working longer hours to meet deadlines to achieve your goals. I don't know about you, but to me, this sounds like such a prescriptive way to exist. And I think we often have found ourselves in a place where we have thought, is this the only way? There's been that question for us. I would like to say a resounding no, this is not the only way. But a lot of people who are also in positions where they aren't privileged enough to work any other way, this is the way they have to exist. This is reality for them. And so a lot of the work that I do is about recognizing constraints and also being realistic that most of us don't have the privilege to say, like, I work in a nightmare work environment, I'm just going to up and leave my job and either be unemployed for a while or, I'll just find something else when the economy has been pretty rough over the past year or so. I have friends who are working in gigs right now that they can't stand and they want to eventually get out, but for now they're kind of stuck. And so I think we've found ourselves kind of between these two worlds of existing where we want a better world for ourselves, but we're faced with this. We're faced with the reality that a lot of us work really hard and kind of suffer for it, right? And as coaches, we can help leaders and individuals and teams improve things, but culture itself is a massive beast. It starts to feel like we're swimming upstream. Has anyone here had experience working with a culture that's kind of toxic? In a few words, can anyone kind of describe, other than toxicity, what that feels like, even physically, what it feels like?
Draining.
Feel free. Draining. Yeah.
Dysregulating.
Yes, dysregulating. Our nervous systems go into trauma response mode, right? Like fight, flight. Yeah. It's really hard to coach and exist in those situations. And I think, now that we're all starting to talk, I think in the past like 10 years or so, there's been a lot more conversations about culture. How do we improve culture? How do we do this differently? I think we've been looking at it backwards. And I think that it's more important and you will be able to iterate on things faster and see progress when we start with behavior over culture. Because fixing culture means changing the mindsets of a bunch of people. We can't make anyone do that. If there's an executive who's a jerk, or even a team member who's a jerk, all we can do is find a way to work around or with this human. We can't force them to make change, right? So when things are bad, we'll all know about it. We have the internet now. There's lots of ways to find out whether or not an organization is problematic. 86% of job seekers avoid companies with a bad reputation. This is often a symptom of a lack of community and a shared vision. I can't tell you how many organizations I've gone into where I've asked, and I know I'm not alone in this, I've asked folks what the vision of the organization is, and every person says a different thing. This is a really great opportunity to try and align people to one thing, because when we're all focused on different things and we have competing priorities, we're going to run into this issue of, well, I'm supposed to do this, but it goes directly against sales and that goes directly against marketing, but we're all working towards the same thing. I don't understand. One of the byproducts of this is unhappiness, toxicity, all that sort of stuff, right? Oh, and I see that you added some words here. Thank you for adding that in the chat. Yeah, constraining. It's just like really frustrating. Glassdoor, Indeed, Reddit, all of these things, all these places will tell us what we need to know about an organization. Now, sometimes I think it's maybe a person who hasn't regulated themselves yet, and maybe they're jaded and something happened, but your feelings are valid, right? So this is just something I pulled off of LinkedIn, or I'm sorry, Glassdoor. Would not recommend. Before taking a job, talk to people who have worked there. There is a company that you can actually hire to erase negative reviews of your organization. And I've also worked in places where I've been offered something to write a positive review, even though it wasn't true. And so there's a way of gaming the system, but for a short period of time, these exist out in the world, right? This is not an uncommon thing to see. There are a plethora of organizations who have all sorts of problems like this, right? Not what it used to be. Frequent layoffs, C-suite is not trustworthy. If I'm starting to coach an organization and I'm coaching on the behavioral side of things, I'll go to Glassdoor and I'll go to Reddit and see if there are things that exist that help tell me the story that I can relay to the folks who really want to start doing this work. And it's not pretty. A lot of times it looks a little bit like this. And if I see folks starting to respond in Glassdoor, that's fantastic, as long as there's follow through. So if somebody sees something like this and they have their HR department responding and saying, I'm so sorry, this was your experience, come talk to us, and it doesn't feel genuine, people see that and people feel that, right? Trust in an organization is huge, and we as coaches can help others both build trust together, but also learn to trust us in that we are trying to help them do their highest and best to improve the entire experience of whatever it is that their goal is. This is some data that I pulled from Harvard Business Review from 2017, compared with people at low trust organizations. I'm not going to read through all this data, but it's a lot better. Trust enables us to start to have relationships and conversations that are a lot more helpful. And on the right side, I work for Industrial Logic, which is an organization where we work a lot with tech folks, but obviously the work that I do is not just tech specific. So I've also worked with hospitals, clinics, that sort of thing. But we have 4 dimensions of what we call modern agile, and the upper right is making safety a prerequisite. So this means obviously physical safety, but it means mental safety as well. And I think this is easier said than done. So I'm going to shift gears here a little bit, and I want us to think about culture in a smaller way. Because I think that when we look at culture, which is this ginormous thing, I want us to think more about the people that we might interact with every day, whether this is our client, whether this is just our pod of coaches who we work with. I want to talk a little bit about the power of subcultures. So they're defined as groups of people who share norms of behavior, values, beliefs, consumption patterns, and lifestyle choices that differ to varying degrees. So this might look like the subculture of a C-suite is going to look very different than the subculture of a mid-level manager and the people that report to them, right? They're going to have their own energy kind of moving around. But I think a lot of folks, when they exist in those subcultures, if they're not a leader, and a lot of people downplay how they lead other people and how they help other people, they think they have no choice. They think they're just along for the ride. There's nothing they can do to improve things. And in organizations or communities, those of us who don't like what we see or want to do things differently can find one another to help create something different. And I think a lot of us who are coaches get into coaching practice for this very reason. We want to disrupt the things that are no longer working. We want to start having those tougher conversations and be thoughtful about the way that we're having them. So subcultures challenge what no longer feels valuable or genuine. So I want to share a little bit about how I came across the punk movement as something that felt really contextual and really specific to the work that I was doing. This is a photo of the band Bad Brains. They are based in Washington, D.C. Subcultures like the punk movement change the landscape that we live in. So when punk first became a thing, and there's all this sort of debate, I've done tons of research around, did it start in the UK? Did it start in America? It doesn't really matter. The purpose behind it is that it created disruption in a really good way. Now, that's not to say that none of them were never toxic, and I'll get to that later. But the intention behind it was to disrupt, to be a disruptor. They challenged the status quo. At the time, in the late 70s and early 80s, there were all these big, fancy, expensive record labels, and you had to basically sell your soul to market to them, and you would produce music that was meant for the mainstream. Well, what if you weren't part of the mainstream? What if you watched things like the Dick Van Dyke Show, or, you know, gosh, I'm trying, My Three Sons, and thought, I don't see myself anywhere in there. That's how the punk movement started. They didn't want to be a part of that. They wanted to create their own thing. And it was really based around community, because it takes a group of individuals to create a movement. And so this started with folks just talking to each other, saying, how can we create something different? How can we do something different and have it impact people in a really great way? I'll probably talk a few times about Kathleen Hanna. Is anyone familiar with Kathleen Hanna? Know who she is? Well, you will by the time we're done with this today. So Kathleen Hanna was the lead singer, is the lead singer of the band Bikini Kill. They were one of the first feminist punk bands that ever existed. She just released a book, which I will have a link to at the end because I can't get enough of it. It is phenomenal. She is funny. She's smart. She's witty. She's fantastic. Obviously, I'm a bit of a fan. But in this book that just came out, she talks so much about how it's about questioning problematic behavior. You know, as a woman who was a Spitfire, she felt like she couldn't have a voice. And when she would stand up for things that were wrong, people would laugh at her, including folks like her dad, who also was probably brought up by a bunch of toxic people. The overlap that I see when I showed that photo of Mad Men, it's the same type of mentality. When people were leaders who were toxic, sexist, racist, whatever, that was all taught by someone prior, and nobody was willing to disrupt. I think it is our job as coaches to be those disruptors. That doesn't mean we're going to be able to tackle every single thing every single time, but that's where subcultures come in. We might not be able to initially change the culture of an entire organization, but we can change the relationships with who we're working with. It's about challenging the status quo, but really punk is very much so, as is coaching, doing things DIY. This is one of my favorite things about punk culture that you will read in almost any book, see in any documentary about it. Doing things yourself, because nobody else was willing to do it. And if you don't want to be part of this really toxic culture, what are you going to do? You have to create something different. So I've got some quotes sprinkled throughout here from some of my favorite punk musicians. And this one is Joey Ramone from the Ramones. Punk is about being an individual and going against the grain and standing up and saying, this is who I am. I think a lot of times we feel the need to assimilate into the culture of something, right? Often it's not the invitation of, tell us what you need, tell us what you want. Even when we start often when I've started as a coach in an organization, it's, okay, here are the things that you need to do, go do that thing. It should be an exchange, right? So I want to talk a little bit about leading and lagging indicators in organizations. So some leading indicators that I've seen: pertinent and confident voices from employees. What do you think this could look like? Can you think of examples? And feel free to just blurt them out. What would those voices look like or sound like?
Well, honestly, one of the first things that came to me is an employee at any level passing a C-suite person in the hall and saying, hello, do you have a minute?
Yeah, totally. You might not be able to actually be a flat organization, but that doesn't mean that someone's untouchable. We should be able to have that interaction, right? What else could this look like?
Someone bringing forward a problem that they see and a solution to fix it as a recommendation.
Yes, right. Not just that. I actually really love that you tied both of those together, Kelly. So it's not just seeing a problem, it's also coming up with some ideas for what can be done. If I go into an organization, and I'll get to that in the lagging one, and it's just people complaining without doing anything, that's not going to do a lot of help. Also, continuous communication from leaders and executives. One thing that I don't think is a leading indicator, and I haven't called it out here specifically, but doing a yearly survey, that is not a great way to engage with your employees when you do it once a year. Because that's a snapshot in time. And as someone who used to be, and still is very into things like user research, what are things that users actually want? What do they need? If we connect with our users, you have a product, if we connect with them once a year, how connected are we to them? Not very. We don't really know what they want or what they need. And a shared dialogue. This can look like town halls where maybe a leader in a subculture says, hey, once a month, I want to invite folks in to either do anonymous questions, or maybe if we feel really secure with one another, we can have an open dialogue about things so that there's a give and take. It's not just I dictate things to you, therefore you do them. People aren't going to be invested in that. Lagging is silence without reason. What do you think I mean by that? Silence without reason. What would silence with reason look like? What would be a reason for it?
Fear of retaliation or fear for your job.
Yeah. If you're afraid that you're going to offend someone, you're probably not going to say something. Right. Being afraid of offending other people, being afraid of not knowing enough, being afraid of, it becomes being afraid of your own spiral and negativity spirals. So as I mentioned, and actually Kelly, that was a great point, bringing up hey, let's change this thing. Here's an idea I have. Might not even be the idea that we go with, but I have an idea. When I've worked with teams and I've seen this negativity spiral, it can be a really hard thing to stop, right? And then high turnover. So this is a superpower that I think all of us as coaches can use. If an organization brings us in to try and improve things, one of the first things I'll do is say, what do your retainment numbers look like? How many people are leaving and why? Because sadly, sometimes you got to hit them where it hurts, and that's the pocketbook. And if I need to show you, like, this is how much money you're losing every month in turnover, that's going to create kind of a wake-up call for them, right? So Patti Smith is one of my favorite humans on earth. If you are unfamiliar with her, she is literally the godmother of punk. I can't say enough about her. She is one of the most gentle and fierce humans simultaneously. And I love this quote from her. To me, punk rock is the freedom to create, the freedom to be successful, and the freedom to not be successful, the freedom to be who you are. I think that we have such a fear of doing things wrong. We don't recognize the power behind doing things wrong. It teaches us things, right? So this is a quote from an executive who I've worked with in the past, former client. My greatest fear and expectation, so both, is that my last day of work before I retire is that I'll walk out the door, have a heart attack, and die. Actual executive who literally has a heart issue already, covered in tattoos, definitely not fun. So this human, who is a friend of mine and I love dearly, has a countdown on his phone for when he can finally be done and enjoy life. And in the meantime, he is just driving himself into the ground. I've asked him for his support with my coaching practice, and he says, I just can't read about work when I'm not there, because it's just, and as I've politely and directly pointed out to him, this isn't about you. That's his choice, right? This is another executive that I've worked with who wanted to make change. People need more than pizza parties. But what would your response be to this as a coach? If somebody said people need more than pizza parties, what could your response be to that?
What
Kelly,
do
I
you
saw
think they
you.
need?
Yeah.
What was that?
What do you think they need?
Yeah, what do you think they need? You know them. And often I think a lot of leaders that I work with, especially earlier in my career, where I feel like as a coach, I'm such a doer. I just was like, okay, how can we fix this problem? It took me a long time to realize I wasn't the one who could or should do the fixing. It was them. And so it was about having that conversation of, okay, cool. Well, what do you think? And they would say, well, I don't know. This feels too big to tackle. And then it becomes the conversation of, then let's look at it in a smaller way. Let's break it down. $223 billion were lost last year due to people leaving their jobs for an unstable and or toxic culture. And yet companies continue to chase the ever elusive more, better, faster. If anyone's ever worked in any facet of tech, I'm sure you've heard it. We focus on the delivery like it's going to change something and it's not working. I watch folks spin their wheels and they're like, well, we don't have time to focus on things like culture. We don't have time. We don't have time. We don't have time. We have to go build the wrong thing first for users because we actually don't know what they want. It's not working and something has to change. So what if we stopped waiting? And what if we did it ourselves and helped our clients do this wherever they are in an organization? Meaning, if you're working on a team where it's all junior folks with a mid-level manager, maybe who's never done it before, that doesn't mean that change can't be made. Quite the opposite. So how do we do that? This is a quote from Greg Ginn of Black Flag, who's also one of my favorite bands. And I'm realizing like I did not have a long enough list of to reads and to watches after this. So feel free to hit me up afterwards if you're interested. He said, we want to create an atmosphere where people are encouraged to think for themselves rather than just accept what they're being told. And I think that we as coaches are trying to empower other people to do that, right? I think when we think about, let's actually ask this as a blanket statement. When you hear the word punk, what do you think of? And there's no wrong answer here, but like, what do you think of?
I think of a rebel.
Think of a rebel. Yeah. Maybe Mohawks. Maybe some of us think of like thrashing around at a concert or something like that. There was a reason behind all of that. The folks in these bands, like there have been some really incredible deep dives into punk culture. And I'm going to share some of these books at the end where there's interviews with all these people where these people are really friggin' smart. And they're like, we knew exactly what we were doing. We wanted to push the envelope so that other people would push it with us. We wanted folks to realize like, you don't have to sit around and take it. How do you become a part of the conversation? This is where our power lies. This is the DIY of it. There's another picture of Bad Brains from DC. It takes a village and we are that village. We as coaches have that capability, that intuition. And as we continue with our practice, we're forever evolving and growing, right? How do we let folks know, hey, if you feel stuck, there are options. Now, I am going to eventually get to what if you don't have an option? We'll cross that bridge eventually. I want to pause here. Does anyone have any questions?
And even just what's something that's sticking with you already?
I want to learn more about the punk movement and the
Yeah.
lessons in there.
What was the last piece that you said, Michael? More about the punk movement and what?
The lessons that are in there.
Yeah.
How great to take something outside of my general daily, experience or knowledge and say, ooh, how does that transfer or translate? And
Right.
what do we learn from that? I'm really excited.
Awesome. Yay. Me too. Awesome. So I want to talk about being a movement maker as a coach. I've played a lot with the idea of like, can I call myself a punk coach? That would be kind of fun. I'm not sure if I've landed there yet, but I think it involves three really important pieces. I think it means knowing your own frustrations. It also means finding your people and democratizing priorities. And this is something that we can teach other people to do, but it also means that we can do it for ourselves. Whenever I find myself in a situation where I'm having to practice what I preach, I feel like someone's like, gotcha. You can't just teach this stuff, you have to actually do it, right? So this is a quote from Ian MacKaye. He was a part of Minor Threat and Fugazi. Minor Threat is one of my favorite punk bands. They're fantastic. Once you get your choice of expletive together, once you get your own mind together, it makes life for you and the people around you so much more agreeable and understandable as opposed to constant problems. I think probably one of the most common things that I see when I'm brought into an organization and we start talking about culture or behavior or something like that, I see a lot of this, or I hear a lot of this. It's other people's fault. Somebody else is doing this thing, which means that they suck, my job sucks, something's terrible. There's not that view into yourself, right? So before we can even start thinking about culture, we have to tackle ourselves, okay? This is from a book on psychological safety that I actually don't, I have a reference to it at the end, but I'm not a huge fan of the book, but I'm a huge fan of this graphic and this idea. It has to start with the self before we start working with other folks, right? That's a lot of the work that we have to do as a coach. Then we can grow to team, which is kind of that subcultural level, and then we can grow to culture. This means understanding your needs. Understanding your triggers, proactive versus reactive. Can any of you think of something, if you feel safe enough to share, that makes you reactive in a conversation? And you can just feel free to blurt it out. And I can start. If somebody tries to give me work that sounds like project management, I get very reactive because I used to be a project manager and I hated it. So that's something for me. What about you? What's something that makes you reactive? Not just as a coach, but as a human.
Honestly, for me, it's always been some sort of, and maybe I'll be able to come up with a behavioral example, but what I interpret as selfishness, like not granting someone compassion, not being willing to take a moment to help, not benefit of doubt, whatever, that I'm just like, and I know I would stake my precious life that the person would want that given to them.
Yeah.
And if I'm not breathing well,
Exactly. Yeah. It makes you reactive. I see in the chat, we've got negativity and judgment. Yeah. Those things will make you reactive. And it's so important to know that they make you reactive. Why is it important to know that it makes us reactive? Because that doesn't mean we're never going to experience it again. It's a thing. People are human.
Tara, it makes me think of the reaction versus being able to respond. I sometimes enjoy playing with that a little bit. Like, at least for me, if I can feel the moment and notice the reaction before I actually take action on that, it gives me a chance to be a little more thoughtful or present.
Yeah, absolutely. Thinking about your response. Like, are you giving yourself time to kind of come out of that amygdala hijack state? Are folks familiar with amygdala hijack or have heard of it before? Yeah, right. So when our amygdala takes over our lizard brain, it thinks it's protecting us from something, because when we were cave humans, we were running from saber-toothed tigers and all that stuff. We don't need that protection a lot of times now, but our brain will still send these signals, and our prefrontal cortex, which is our logic brain, literally cannot function. So if we're responding in a reactive mode, it's not going to be in our highest and best, nor is it going to be in the highest and best of the other person.
And
also
Natalia says in the chat that she really likes the curiosity over judgment bullet.
Thank you, Natalia. I love that too. That is something that a colleague and I, we actually have stickers that are a question mark on one side and an exclamation point on the other. If we choose to be curious instead of judgmental, how does that shift things for us? Also, a gentle reminder that we are human. I, for sure, probably, I judged someone's outfit like 3 days ago. I remember saying something, and actually my partner went, oh, well, I think that was their choice. And I went, oh, dang, you were judgmental about that. Why were you being judgy? And then it's like not being harsh, so harsh on myself that I can't recover. And that's what we're going to dig into next. I don't know what I did here. Hold on 1 second. There we go. Okay. So this is a fantastic book. I can't recommend it enough, called Taming the Culture Tiger by Kate Price. When I first started doing a lot of this org behavior work, I wanted to focus on that beast, that tiger that we talk about. Improving your self-awareness helps your ability to detect how others also respond to you. So if we know our reactivity, we know how we're coming across, then we're going to have a lot more control over what we're putting out into the world, right? We want to be thoughtful about how other people are going to respond to us. Has anyone seen this poster before? Okay. This is one of the most vital tools in my toolkit as a coach and as a human being. You can read more about it at responsibility.com, and I have a link to that at the end. I went through an immersion program with the Responsibility Company about 1.5 years ago. So it was started by 2 gentlemen named Bill McCarley and Christopher Avery. They both have PhDs in psychology, and they said they wanted to pose the question, why do we take or not take responsibility? And what they discovered was responsibility and conflict are internal. It is not something that someone can give to us. So I'm going to give you an example. Let's say I am supposed to give a presentation. I'm going to give a talk. And my team is there, and I'm kind of speaking for all of us. I'm speaking to a client, and I'm running really late. Well, the first thing I might do is lay blame and say, oh, there's traffic. There's all these cars in the way. I can't get you any faster. Then when I get there, it's like excuse central. Ugh. Traffic was so bad. I was the one who was forced to do this. I didn't even want to do it. And then I start feeling bad, and I work my way up to shame. And then it's, I feel so sorry. I can't stop apologizing. It's to the point where people are actually telling me to stop apologizing. If anyone, especially women, has ever experienced that, please stop apologizing. And then obligation, where it's, I didn't have a choice. There was nothing I can do. I'm stuck. But what do we think responsibility could sound like in this scenario? What would responsibility sound like if we're running late, we have to give a presentation, we're stuck in traffic, we get there, we're late? What does responsibility sound like?
I should have allowed more time to get here this morning. Thanks for your patience.
Okay. Great, Michael. Thank you. Others? I also really like the thanks for your patience as opposed to sorry, sorry, sorry. I'm working really hard on trying to do that. So yeah, we want to apologize and then say, in the future, maybe I will take ownership and maybe set my alarm sooner. I recognize that I own this. I could have called someone. I will say, I try to eliminate the words could have and should have, like coulda, shoulda, woulda, because there's nothing we can do about it now, right? All we can do is be present in the situation we're in and say, apologize once, say, I'm really sorry that I was late. Next time I will do X, Y, Z. Thanks for your patience. I think that's perfect. And so again, what the 2 of them discovered, McCarley and Avery discovered, is what we often think of as responsibility isn't that at all. Okay. Oftentimes we're below the line. By the way, the goal is not to always be landing in responsibility. That is not the reality of a human being. My colleague has been doing this for 10 years, and he said the goal for him has always been, and the goal of the program is to find your way up the ladder faster, but never to just land there. you're going to find yourself laying blame. You're going to find yourself justifying. You're going to find yourself feeling shame. Why do you think quit and denial are on the right-hand side? Why would they be on the right-hand side? Kind of grayed out.
I don't know if this is it. The thing that occurred to me is that they actually affect other people directly. If I quit, it's sort of an external thing. If
Oh,
I'm
interesting.
feeling obligated, it's an internal thing. But
I don't think, Bev, I don't think I've ever heard anyone put it that way, but I really like that because that is true. It is external. So if we deny something, we're not even in the realm of reality. There's no way for us to move up the ladder because we're not internal at all. It's all like, that's not me. And quit is not so much quit like something's toxic and I should get out of it. Quit is you're stuck in that lay blame, justify shame. If you've ever found yourself in that cycle and you can't get out of it, you kind of just quit and you give up mentally, right? You check out. And so a lot of the work of the responsibility process is recognizing when you're below the line and what you can do to gently lead yourself back up. What questions do we have on this?
well, Tara, how would you describe the difference between the left side and the right side?
For me, the difference is we're not in the realm of possibility of getting above the line. You're stuck in some way, shape, or form. You're not really willing to consider, or you don't have the capability to move up. Why red and green? That's a good question. Why do you think red and green? Does anyone have any ideas?
I'm wondering, Tara, if the red is more focusing on the other, saying, I need to blame you, I need to justify it's not my fault, whereas the green gets more internal.
Right. Yes. The red is the kind of, it's almost a push, right? It's like, this isn't my problem. This is your problem. The green is, okay, now I do accept that this is my problem, but to the point of kind of no return, right? Like we're apologizing tenfold for stuff. Gaslighting. Yeah. Maybe we're blaming other people and we don't see it as blaming other people. There's a lot more that I can go in depth on this stuff, and I don't have a ton of time to do that today, but this has been, like I said, a practice for me where it has just been so amazing. As someone who coaches other people, as someone who teaches folks anywhere from 18 to, someone who's about to retire, it's such a great way to show up. And it also, I will also share one thing it is not. This is not a tool to put on other people, because then we're laying blame and we're judging someone else. That's not to say you will never see that in people. In fact, now that you're paying attention, if you choose to do that, you're going to see it, right? So here's ways that you can practice. We have something called the Catch Sooner game, where I will just take a Post-it and I will do something like, okay, this week in meetings, I'm going to see when I can catch myself in lay blame. I will create 2 columns. One column is I caught it, meaning I didn't actually verbalize it, didn't fly out of my mouth, it stayed in my brain. Number 2 is it got out. That's the other side. So you kind of give yourself a little, tick mark when that happens. You win either way because it's building self-awareness. This is really about the practice of self-awareness, of where we are. You can always find an accountability buddy. A lot of times I teach workshops where I ask people the difference between accountability and responsibility. Does anyone know? One you
Natalia's saying-
take, one you take and one you're given, Natalia. Exactly. Accountability is an exchange. So if Bev and I are hanging out and she says, hey, I'm gonna go make a lunch run, I say, hey, cool, can you grab me a sandwich or whatever? I hand her a 20. Now there's an exchange. I'm holding her accountable. So if there's someone on this call or someone that you know is trying to dig into this work, it's really awesome to have an accountability buddy and talk about, like, if you decide to do the catch sooner game, maybe together. I'm just thinking about this new podcast I'm doing. I'm definitely doing this with my co-host because it'll be really fun. But how does it look for you? And what new things have you learned about yourself? Oh, I had no idea that that throws me into justifier. I had no idea that this thing throws me into shame. You learn so much about yourself and other people when you do that. And then, of course, responsibility.com is their website. They have classes where you can get certified as a practitioner, where you can do an immersion program. Highly recommend the work. They are all about freedom, power, and choice, which is kind of the other piece of this that I just think is so powerful. So, any questions on that before I move on? Oh, I will have a link to that in the end, Natalia. Claiming the Culture Tiger by Kate Price. Taming the Culture Tiger, that's what it is. Yeah, but I'll have a link to that at the end. All right, so here's another quote, and you will notice it is not from a musician at all. It is from Neil Gaiman. Does anyone know Neil Gaiman? He's fantastic. He is a writer. I actually first discovered him when I was a tiny music nerd in junior high because I was obsessed with Tori Amos, and he is one of her besties. And that's how I discovered his Sandman series, which is now on Netflix. And he's fantastic because, as I mentioned in those first slides, punk is not a music movement. It's a people movement. It's not just about music. It's about everything. So this is a quote from Neil. Punk still informs everything I do. You have to be willing to make mistakes, and you have to be willing to make mistakes in public. Sometimes the best way to learn something is by doing it wrong and looking at what you did. And I really just felt like that spoke to the responsibility process so much for me, because it's kind of having to look in the mirror and say, ooh, I thought I was on the right track, but maybe there's some stuff that I still have to learn. Humans do not love change. I think there are probably many of us who have been in organizations trying to help folks where they say they want change, but they might be telling us something different. Maybe they're afraid. So this is a quote from Kathleen Hanna, who is the lead singer of Bikini Kill. Sit down and ask yourself, what is the most important thing to me? What grosses me out the most? What upsets me the most? Is it healthcare? Is it so many people being hungry in our culture? Mix that with doing something you love, something you could keep doing forever and ever. For me, it was ending violence against women, and I mixed it with music. And I've had a 25-year career. So that's my advice. Find something you really care about and mix that with something you love doing. That is literally, when I read that quote, I was like, that's it. That is literally the work that I try and do, is melding the things that I'm really sick of and the things that I love doing, which is working with people. So I want you to take 5 minutes. Actually, we'll just say, let's take 3 minutes. I want you to think about what's the most important thing to you that makes you upset. Just like she's talking about. Is it something that you're seeing right now about the folks in Palestine? It might not even be related to coaching. It could be related to anything. Maybe it's a client that you're working at where you're so sick of seeing XYZ. What would you love to see change, and where would you love to see change? And who could you jam with to help make that change? Because this really is about community. This is about, I'm unhappy about this problem. Who can I talk to about it? Because that's really the work that the punk movement did. It was, I'm stuck. I feel like an outsider. You're an outsider too. Cool. Let's work together. So I just want to like give you a minute or two to think on that and write it down. And then if you're comfortable enough, I'd love to hear your ideas. Sure, some folks are still thinking and writing. But I'm wondering if anyone wants to share the most important things that kind of make you upset and where you'd love to see change.
Well, I can go with this. It's something that's been on my mind. It really upsets me that an election could be lost because people don't show up to vote. And I happen to love walking with friends, and I love reading books and talking about them. And so one of these I've already taken action on, and I have invited my book group to do postcards for
Ooh, that's awesome. Love that.
to get out the vote. So we have a postcard writing thing because I love sending letters to people. So this also means I can write a personal note and send something in the actual mail, not the email or text.
I
The
love
post
that.
office. I can support the post office. And then I do like walking with friends. And the other thing I'd like to take on is getting get out the vote yard signs that are clever and cute and nonpartisan, and wander around with a friend and go for a walk and see how many people we can get to say yes to a yard sign.
Love that. That is like putting it right into action, doing boom, boom, boom. That's awesome, Beth. Thank you for sharing that. Other folks, things that came up for you.
I'll share. I don't think I'm as eloquent as Bev was in hers or as clear, but I find that I'm easily upset whenever there is us them language or othering, which tends to target marginalized groups.
Mm.
We even joke at our house that mom has a social justice sort of trigger, but and I would love to see more change in schools and in legislation and in how we show up with each other as humans. How to make a difference in that way with what I love. I find energy in partnering with other people. I serve on a few commissions, but I'm wondering if I also love using art to engage people around difficult conversations. And I'm wondering if I could get more creative about how to explore some of those issues and help people learn about each other by introducing that like a third thing to talk through it and around it with. And so I'm going to play with that a little more.
I so love you sharing that, Michael. That's awesome. Are you a Libra?
I'm a Pisces.
Okay. Well, there's that too. Yeah. Lots of
I'm
feelings.
curious to hear what Libra is. That a justice?
Yes, justice. I am partnered with a double Libra, meaning sun and moon. I do astrology stuff too, but all the justice minded stuff, like being considerate of others. And I actually wrote down things that were very adjacent to what you just said. Marginalization of people, the othering, lack of diversity. This friend of mine who I'm going to be doing this podcast with said something awesome today that she heard. Can't remember where she heard it, but instead of saying like, oh, you're welcome in this space, it's, we created a space with you in mind. Because there's such a difference, right? Like, oh, it just like blew my mind. I'm like, that's so rad. It's such a different thing, right? And a lot of the work, like I'm not going to spoil the Kathleen Hanna book that I'm going to refer you to after this, but a lot of how she started was art. Because she was like, how do I create something that gets people talking about what it is? It's that spark, that conversation starter. And a lot of actually punk musicians started as artists. Like Kurt Cobain sketched. He was a sketcher and he drew a bunch of stuff, and that was kind of how he started to emote things. And then it eventually became the collaboration of other musicians, and then kind of figuring out like, oh, here's stuff I want to do. So I want you to let this stuff kind of marinate. You know, this isn't something you have to solve for today, but this is something that can help kind of carry you as your own career evolves and changes, ebbs and flows. Like your number one might change because of something, you know? So just be open to that could absolutely change. So I talked about disruption, and I did talk about a little bit of toxicity in kind of the punk space. You know, there was some terrible like skinhead culture, that type of thing. That wasn't part of punk culture, but they tried to kind of adopt it. This is also being mindful about the way that we approach disruption, right? The way that we approach a conversation. You know, I've worked on teams where I was a coach, and there was the very precisely put bad apple who can spoil the bunch. And that is really a thing. And I think that when we get negative, or we focus on our anger, we focus on, you know, maybe even unintentionally othering, all of these things, it can be more harmful. So there's this fine line, right? I talked a little bit about Patti Smith and how she's like super feisty, but she's also really gentle. And I think that's really where that power is. It's recognizing like, this is something I don't dig into big time in this presentation, but I also am a tarot practitioner. So I read tarot, and I've done it for years. And I'm a Leo, and so my card is strength. So strength is Leo. And in my favorite deck, there's a lion's head that's being held by this person. And it's really, strength is more about intentional restraints than it is about lashing, right? It's about having that gentle power to say, I can change things and I don't have to hurt other people to do it. So I think it's really important for us to remember that. So the more that you talk about this stuff, and actually Bev's example was so perfect, like finding who else is frustrated and wants to do something about it. Test some hypotheses. I have teams do this. I have executives and leaders do this. What's a hypothesis you want to test? Because I think where org behavior gets pushed to the side is people think it's all subjective and it doesn't hold a lot of weight. Well, it does if you measure it. So it's about, luckily I have a data sciencey nerdy background. So I was like, well, I'm going to throw this into it too. That's a part of my bundle, is like, okay, cool. Well, what data can we pull from it? And what story is it telling us? What do we want to test? If we set up, or if we walk through a neighborhood, let's say we want to put up, you know, offer signs to, you know, 20 houses. If we get 10 people saying yes, that's a positive response. That's something we want to continue. If people are really upset about it, maybe we need to change our approach. It's like learning how we're doing these things, right? And democratizing the movement. So creating things like a working agreement can be really helpful. Are folks here familiar with working agreements? I'm sure Andy is. Yeah, okay. So this is our working agreement that we use at Industrial Logic. We start with being clear and getting people to agree to these things, and then ask what's missing. So curious, open-minded and caring, but like other things. If we start negative spinning, how can we have a conversation about how we want to call each other in when that happens? And actually, Michael, I did a talk last week at a client where someone said, what about neurodiverse people who are not going to be comfortable with that? Then it has to be a part of that conversation as a group, as That's why we have to start with ourselves first. So getting to know you, how do you say, this does not work for me at all, but this could? And experimenting with that. So really being considerate about who's in the room. You're not always going to have a group full of extroverts. Most times you won't. I know since most of my career has been in tech, I would say maybe 10%. And every time I take the Myers-Briggs, I go down in more introversion. I'm almost right at the cusp. Now I'm like an ambivert, as they call them. But having a working agreement with the people that you're trying to make movements with, it's huge because it's a way to share expectations, right? So here are some success stories that I have found for organizations. Autodesk has phenomenal reviews. There aren't a lot of organizations on Glassdoor who have phenomenal reviews, and it speaks very highly of the organization. Does it mean their culture is not problematic? No. There are going to be pockets everywhere, but this is where subcultures can really thrive. Usually I look at these as leading indicators that you're doing something right. And once I start doing interviews, talking to people, I can identify these teams feel really strong autonomy. They feel like that freedom that Patti Smith is talking about. I feel free to do whatever. And then if I talk to teams who are like, well, I just get work to do and I do it. Okay, well, let's kind of pull at that thread. Why is that the case? Having reviews like this, strong company, strong leadership, strong culture. You'll notice they're listing cons, which is a great thing. No organization is perfect. No person is perfect. Too focused on development deliveries. Shocking. Not shocking at all. It's the fact that they're going to actually say it. They're having these conversations, right? And even if this is, let's say this software QA engineer, this is their first time doing something like this, and they're doing it anonymously, that's a step. That's a step towards feeling comfortable with your voice. No problem, Andy. Take care. So good seeing you. So I'll talk a little bit about this work that I do. I mentioned that I am a fearless organization practitioner. If you work with organizations where there's just too many conflicting priorities, culture's kind of a mess, I go into organizations and actually measure the psychological safety of teams. I've done it for multitude of teams and organizations. I've done it for leadership groups across the board. The 4 domains are inclusion and diversity, willingness to help, attitude to risk and failure, and open conversation. On the right, you're going to see an actual test that I did with a client with what their overall score was. As you can imagine, the story is not really about the number. It's about the story behind the number. It's not about solutioning right away. It's starting to dig in. So it's my job to ask those really powerful questions to say, what's really going on here? And we start with a working agreement, because otherwise I'm some stranger. They don't know who I am. I've met with them for maybe 20 minutes prior. I meet with folks. But if this is something you're interested in doing, I'd be happy to have a conversation with you. I also teach an actionable psychological safety workshop. This is just a quote from a student. I'm super, super proud of this work. When I first started doing it about 3 years ago, I had to beg people to come to classes. Now I've actually sold them out, which is like fantastic because people recognize the value of it. It is about teaching people in real time over 6 weeks. We start on a Monday or a Tuesday. We walk through some methods and practices. I ask people to create a hypothesis and actually experiment with the people they work with, and with, if they want to do family and friends and partners, they're welcome to do that too. And then at the end of the week, we reflect, we measure, we talk about what happened. And so you walk away with actionable skills. So it's not just, oh, I just learned a bunch of stuff and now I'm just going to forget it, right? So a few takeaways for us. You have way more power than you realize to make change. We all do, right? And it's never your job to change anyone. You know, the reason why the punk movement was successful is they weren't looking for approval. They wanted to do their own thing, right? Negativity will kill a vibe and kill progress. If you find yourself in that space, give yourself some time, take a break, build a network of people who want change just as much as you do, and understand that this is going to take time, and just start and enjoy the ride. It doesn't mean you have to do it right, right? This is my mentor who I mentioned before. He was the person who created DevJam, where I first worked in tech, and I found it absolutely like by accident, but there's nothing by accident, right? And he used to always tell me things are always hard when you care. And that's what coaches really do, is they care. deeply about the work. It's always going to be tough, but it's about finding the tough things and the things that you love and kind of tying them together, right? Because people have the power. We have the power to change things. Here's some suggested reading, because I mentioned a bunch of stuff. I will share this PDF with the group afterwards, so don't feel like you have to write all this stuff down. Our Band Could Change Your Life is about kind of the indie movement, like the beginning of punk and then post-punk. Taming the Culture Tiger, which I've mentioned. Rebel Girl, My Life as a Feminist Punk by Kathleen Hanna just came out. It's already a New York Times bestseller. If you can listen to audio, she is so phenomenal on audio. Like if you have Spotify, you can listen for free. Under the Big Black Sun is about the West Coast punk movement, which is phenomenal. There's lots of interviews with the Go-Go's, because yes, the Go-Go's were actually not just this super bright and shiny poppy band. They were very punk and very intense and amazing. And then some podcasts and some talks that I've done about coaching as a leader, building psychological safety on teams, and then finding agility through psychological safety. Again, I'm going to send this to you all, so don't feel like you have to screenshot these right now. I am going to give you a 20% discount if you want to take my class. Again, I love teaching it. It's so much fun. It starts September 9th. And I've got a code for this group for Growth Rings 2024. It's only good for 24 hours. We have a few seats left. I would love to have some of you in class, or all of you. So feel free to explore that. You can also connect with me on Substack. I write a Substack newsletter every week, sometimes more than that. LinkedIn, I provide all the things. Ta-da, questions.
So what questions do you have for Tara? And/or I'd love for you, each person who's still with us, I know some people had to drop off, I'd love for you to share something that's really, that you're curious about, that you're taking away from this, that was moving to you, whatever, something you disagreed with, whatever it is. I'd love for Tara to be able to get some real-time sense of what landed for you today.
That would be fantastic, especially because I'm doing a version of this talk in Manchester. So don't feel like you have to hold back. It's very much so iterating.
So Natalia's put something in the chat.
Yep. Love the punk theme and the reference point. Lots of great takeaways. Grateful for this positive bump in my learning. Awesome. Thank you, Natalia. I appreciate that.
I'll just offer that I love taking the idea of something that you notice that you want to make change about because it bothers you, and partnering it with something you love. That gives me a new lens for thinking about how to grow forward and perhaps make some change.
Right.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
Kelly.
Yep. Mine is very similar to Michael's, just the reflection on how can I combine something that upsets me with something that I love so I can have a positive change. And then I also wrote down the part that stuck out about we created a space with you in mind as a former
Right.
practitioner in the onboarding space. That was always our goal, and I loved the wording around it.
Okay. I got to find out who said that because it's so brilliant.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Marla, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciated so much from this. As I said, I'm kind of new to learning about coaching and developing, and so hearing your insight was extremely valuable to me. And I really appreciated the takeaway of finding your people to jam with, taking something that, might frustrate you and finding your people that share that same frustrations in that space, to be able to help create change. So I appreciated that a lot and look forward to using that continued learning in my everyday life.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Marla.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and
Thank
I know
you.
you had me at the beginning just with start with behavior, not culture, and how hopeful that is, how encouraging it is, how actionable it is, how scalable to small
Right.
it is, and then you can make it bigger through a lot of the things you did. And ditto what other people said. And I think I'm going on Spotify this afternoon to listen to Hannah I think a
Yes.
bunch of us are like, oh yeah, we got something. If we've got an hour, we're gonna start there.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So anybody have any final comments or questions for Tara? Tara, any final comments you'd like to share before I close us out for today?
I've just really enjoyed this time and so appreciate your reflections on this stuff. And I actually think, Michael, you made me think about this, but I definitely want to add some images of some of Kathleen Hanna's artwork that she did, because I think that that would be really powerful to share. Like, this is what it can look like. This is what the conversation can start with. It's something that kind of opens the door. And if you're too scared or you're unsure or you're just trying to measure where people are at, it can be a really great barometer for whatever it is that you're trying to dig into. So thank you for that, Michael.
Yeah.
Otherwise, yeah.
Yeah, I will put a plug in for Michael and Andy's growth ring about coaching in the third thing. Tara, I think you would love that recording.
Awesome.
On our
Yes, that
YouTube
sounds great.
channel. I also want to say something I didn't say at the very beginning, which is I'm just feeling so lucky. And when I'm feeling really happy about something that worked out well for me, I say that I feel smug. So I'm feeling pretty smug about getting Tara on a growth rings, because we had the blessing and the wisdom and the fun of having her as one of our summit speakers, not this past year, but last year.
Yeah.
So I would encourage any of you, if you have suggestions, whether it be suggesting yourself in a topic or suggesting someone else in a topic for growth rings, would love to hear from you. Would love to see you in July on the 18th with Pete Barrage talking about some of the current research around feedback and our role as coach. Some of the things he said to me, I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I can see how I might do that if it's in a 360 kind of setting or it's in whatever. It's just fascinating stuff. And then we're going to have Annie Boyum, who some of you know, and for many of you, maybe you don't, coming a little later in the year to talk about coaches helping clients get into action. So I think all of this kind of actually weaves nicely from where we started today with Tara. Tara, I want to thank you again. This has just been such a great, great thing. And anybody want to agree with me? Tara is a force of nature.
That's the nicest compliment. Thank you so much, Bev. I appreciate that. And thank you all for like your input, showing up, sharing stuff. Yeah, I mean, this is work that we all can do and are doing together. So happy to have you as part of the community and happy to be in it. So thank you so much, Bev, for having me. This was awesome.
And thank you everyone who showed up today and everybody who's watching sometime in the future. May you find that thing you want to change, that thing you love and can't imagine not doing, meld them together and transform the world. We need you.